reason I wanted to do one of these, a reaction to this particular one, is because not only is it the Whatever podcast, but it's a Whatever podcast with frickin' Charlie Kirk. With fricking Charlie Kirk. I'm like, how is this? How could this not be something that I would want to respond to and react to? Because this is probably going to be chock full of horrificness that I can respond to. So, considering we've already talked about the toxic masculinity of Vince McMahon and Donald Trump, why not throw in Charlie Kirk and Whatever podcast talking about, trying to talk about feminism and what is a woman. So this should be good, and by good, I mean horrible. So let's go on and play this, and we'll, I'm a little concerned because it doesn't seem like it's scrolling much beyond the first minute and 15 seconds, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. And if it fails, then we'll try and open it in Opera and we'll do it again that way. So here we go.
I'm curious, who here considers themselves a feminist?
I do. I'm a feminist. Sorry, he wasn't talking to me.
Maybe just show of hands.
I did show my hands. I even, beat him to it. But, it looks like there's at least...
Are you a feminist?
I don't...
That's it? Just Aaron and Pigs.
That's the other thing. They've made feminism into such a dirty word that these women are afraid to even say that they're feminists because they're afraid of what they're going to be called, or how Mr. Kirk or whatchamacallit from the Whatever podcast is going to put, label them. There's nothing wrong with being a feminist, but they create this straw man of what feminism is and then attack the straw man. So they're afraid to be attacked, even though they potentially have the numbers, although it's possible that from these people over here may very well be on the side of the Charlie Kirks of the world, and the people over on this side of the table are probably against the Charlie Kirks of the world. Just saying. Let's continue.
See, Molly?
Yeah, Molly.
A little bit?
Oh, there's
Okay.
one on the right. That was
All right.
wrong. I'll admit it. I was wrong.
So Charlie, we've got some feminists here. What do you think of feminism?
What does Charlie Kirk think of feminism? Oh boy, this ought to be a doozy.
I want them to define the term first, because there's no use in me.
Sure.
Feminism, the crazy idea that gender equality, that the genders should be treated equally under the law.
Giving thoughts on an abstract concept. So
Sure.
So,
I'm all ears.
What's your sense? How do you
He's all ears, but his eyes are very sunken in.
define feminism?
feminism is just simply the advocacy of equality, both social, political, economic, on the basis of all genders everywhere. So,
Hey, sounds good to me. Of course he's going to attack it, but hey, it is what it is.
that's what feminism is to me.
Do you concur?
I concur.
Do you concur?
Concurred.
Okay. Okay.
So you want me to
Do
Your
you,
thought
do
on
you
that,
agree
or-
with their definition of feminism?
that would probably be the most agreed upon definition. So I do believe in equality under the law, obviously. I believe in equality for representation.
Here we go. So yeah, this is going to be stupid. So let's try it under Opera, because I guess the ad blocker thing, you're right. The ad blocker thing is being dumb. I guess I have to look into that some more, because for some reason YouTube's being stupid. All right, so let's dump that. Open up Opera. Yes, I know, Chris. All right, let's try it here. We have to wait for the ads to finish here. There we go. Let's skip the ads. And we are waiting for...
In equality
All right, here we
under
go.
the law,
We're back.
obviously. I believe in equality for representation or enfranchisement to be able to vote, obviously. But you said economic equality. That's interesting. Do you think that
That's interesting. What do you think about economic equality?
female models and male models should be paid the same by law?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so we should make female actresses and models be paid less because they earn about 20 times more than men.
I think when
So
you get
women
to,
would get a pay cut. You're okay
I think
with
when
that?
it comes to creative fields like that, it's going to be very difficult to look at it on the basis of like sex or gender, how you would pay somebody, because that's going to have so many more factors than simply that. But if we're talking about equal economic opportunity,
Ooh, look at the fanciness that they're doing with that split screen. Wow. I'm just impressed that they're starting to do that split screen thing. That I hadn't seen that for a while. Ooh, look at how high tech whatever's being.
is like, for example, should like a man and woman doing the exact same position at a corporate office be paid the same if they're doing the same amount of work? Then
Well, it
yes.
depends on what they study, depends how long they've been there, it depends if they're equally as good at the job, it depends
But
how...
all else being
Hold
equal,
on.
I'm saying if all of
Hold
those
on.
things are equal, can we at least agree they should be paid
that's
the
already
same?
that's already the law. So you're not allowed to discriminate based on gender.
That's the law, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's applied as the law, and people still discriminate and people still get around it. You know, that's why you had to have the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, because despite the fact that you had legislation that required people to be paid equally under the law like that, you had Lilly Ledbetter sue Goodyear Tire because it was determined that she was being paid a discriminatory wage, and the activist conservative Supreme Court in Lilly Ledbetter versus Goodyear Tire ruled that she sued too late because she was somehow supposed to be psychic to determine whether or not she was being paid a discriminatory wage, because they started the clock ticking on the first payment of a discriminatory wage and not when she found out that she was being paid a discriminatory wage, because Alito, who wrote the ruling, is a tool and a dumbass. But, you know, the fact that we have a law technically that says that doesn't mean that we're doing this in practice. And as such, we have to continue to fight to make sure that these ideas are enforced, so it's disingenuous for Mr. Kirk to try and say, we already have laws that say, we have laws that say a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily mean that we follow them.
Your sex based on a law passed in the 1970s.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and that law passed in the 1970s wasn't followed by the Supreme Court.
However, what is now being tried to be passed through other movements is to try to swoop in and say, regardless of qualifications, how often you ask for a raise. So I'll ask a question. Why do you think, for example, the average male, it looks as if they earn more than an average woman in a city? Is it because of sexism or other factors?
I think sometimes implicit
I mean, here's the thing. He's going to make the argument, and it's going to be like, well, because you've had here's the argument that he's going to make, and it's going to be like, because you've had discrimination for so long, you're going to have men who are going to be making more money in certain fields because you've had discrimination for so long, and now women are catching up. So you're still going to have what it looks like a discriminatory wages, but still. So that's going to offset. So you can't look at that. You have to look at other factors when you're comparing whether or not you really have discriminatory wages. It doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have discriminatory wages. So he's going to try and obfuscate the points by misleading the people into saying this is the only thing we're going to be looking at. He's going to deny the other arguments in order for his arguments, and that's my prediction at least. We'll see if that pans out.
bias can be one factor among many, but like all the things that you mentioned earlier, different qualifications, different business acumen, skills, work output, numbers of hours work could all be things that impact pay.
Right. So
and like studies that like focus on the gaps between men and women like do make note of these differences.
Okay, SkizTech, thank you for the gift of 100 subs. Charlie, do you have a response?
No, I hear that. I do want to actually get back to even more of a fundamental question, and I'm sorry I didn't ask this.
Sure.
What is a woman?
Oh, Lord, here we go. What is a woman?
A woman is somebody who presents as our social conception of womanhood.
So
and
you-
acts in such a way.
So Pixie, just can you answer that question without using the word woman or womanhood?
It's because basically it would be a functional definition. So as a society, we have an understanding of what woman is.
What
It's
is
a
that?
man.
Yeah, that's basically.
I am a man.
Well done.
I'm a man without conviction. Sorry. Karma, 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 chameleon. You come and go. Sorry.
Can you elaborate?
XY chromosomes.
Okay, but
Aha! I have a friend who has XY chromosomes but was labeled a female at birth because of the parts. So there are people who will say because you have parts, you're a woman. But other people say it's chromosomes. So what if you have the parts of a woman but the chromosomes of a man? What are you then? That's the exception. Well, trans people are the exception. There you go. So it's again another attempt to obfuscate the issue by trying to pare it down to second grade biology when science is much more complicated than that, because Charlie Kirk can handle things beyond second grade biology.
the problem with that is that I didn't check your chromosomes before coming in here and calling you a man, and you didn't check my chromosomes before coming in here.
Or genitals.
Or genitals, calling me a woman.
So let me just play this out. So first of all, you can't give me a definition without using the word woman.
That's a functional definition. Yeah, sure. Do you know what functional
Yeah,
definitions are?
I'm very well aware, and
Damn.
you should have a functional definition for the most important question in civilization,
No.
right?
Well, the point of
The
a
most important question in civilization. What is a woman? I think he's a little overstating that question. That's the most important question to trolls who want to derail conversations.
functional definition. Functional definitions are a definition that is by the function of something. So, like for example,
No, there's an objective
1 equals
definition.
1 is one is a function of 1. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I do. So then, can you give me an objective, a functional, utilitarian, any sort of biological definition of what a woman is? Because
The
how
problem is-
can we debate feminism if we can't agree what a woman is?
I don't.
How can we debate feminism when we can't define what a woman is? The person didn't give you a definition of feminism that didn't include the definition of feminism that they gave didn't say woman. The definition of feminism that they gave said all genders. It didn't say women. It said all genders. So he's now being disingenuous because he's trying to erect a straw man of a definition of feminism that they did not give. So more disingenuousness from Charlie Kirk. Let's continue.
I would even I feel like Pixie's definition absolutely satisfies the definition of what constitutes womanhood, but I would define it only slightly differently, which is that it's a person who performs a set of social roles that are typically associated with feminine characteristics, but not necessarily, because there are even cis women who fall outside of this, and we still consider them women nonetheless. Like butch lesbians, for example, are women that exhibit very masculine characteristics, but nonetheless society understands them to be women. So
I find cis to be a very offensive word.
Oh no, cis is an offensive word. It's a scientific word, you dingbat. It's the opposite of trans. It's scientific.
By the way, I don't know how you feel about the cis.
I don't
cis men,
think-
cis
I don't
women.
think-
I think it's hate
deeply about
speech
that.
to be
It's hate speech to be scientific.
honest.
I didn't mean to trigger you, Brian.
As-
I would have
as
given
a
you a
s-
trigger warning before if I
So
had known.
do you think anyone can become a woman?
Yep, but not anyone will.
Okay, so then at what point do they become a
I mean, I would argue that trans women were always women from the start. They might just realize that they were women because they might not have been able to realize how to deal with the emotions that they were feeling before they came to the realization that they were women. But trans women were born and they were always women, and then they realized, okay, these are the feelings that I'm dealing with when it comes to my gender identity, and as such, the way to resolve them is, I am a woman, and this is why my biology doesn't match up with the labels that were stuck on my birth certificate. But Mr. Kirk can't quite understand that. Chris in the chat, he's confusing it with that is probably part of the problem. They hear cis, like CIS, and they confuse it with sissy, like the SISSY. They probably hear one and confuse it with the other, and they get upset about it. But they also don't like being labeled they don't like themselves being labeled as not trans, because they don't like themselves being described in such a way, because they don't like themselves having to be labeled as being not something else, where don't label me, but they label everybody else all the time. But whatever.
It will depend on where they are in their gender transition for the most part.
Does it require drugs to become a woman?
No.
Personally, I think it's a mindset. It's a spiritual energy. It's the vibe that you give off. Like
the vibe. Before we continue on, I want to just give everyone an opportunity to answer No, totally fine. To answer Charlie's question, I know you two had already answered. What is a woman? Starting with you, we'll go around.
Of course, they're going to derail the entire conversation about feminism to what is a woman, and the people who just answered gave a very, especially this one right here, gave a very accurate definition, of satisfactory definition of what a woman should be. Of course, Mr. Kirk didn't agree with it, and of course he wasn't going to agree with it because it just went way over his head, but it is what it is.
On the table, go ahead.
Can you skip me?
We'll come back to her.
I'm a woman.
That's the best answer.
I'm every woman. Sorry.
That's the one that Ketanji Brown Jackson should have given in front of the Senate.
So come back to you? Or?
Yeah, come back to me. Come back to me. Let me
Sure,
brainstorm
okay,
on
go
that.
ahead.
Same. I'm a woman.
What is a woman?
Like, I don't.
What about you? Can I have you tilt your mic down just a tad?
Like, I like her definition. I'll take her answer.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Right there.
Yeah.
I'm a woman, but I also do think that a woman is someone who identifies as a woman, and that's that.
I mean,
Chris, like my daughter's teacher says, sounds like a you problem. Exactly.
theoretically, it's someone who's born with a womb, but this generation obviously has proven that men can turn into women. So I'm not discluding that. I still think that they should.
So if somebody with XX chromosomes happened to be born without a womb, would that mean that that person's not a woman?
To be perceived as what they're portraying themselves as. But technically, I still think trans girls, they are a version of a man, but they can still be classed as a woman, which is a bit tricky, but yeah.
That doesn't make any sense, but hey, whatever.
Yeah.
Molly?
I'll say the same answer. I think what constitutes as a woman is the energy that you.
I didn't recognize Molly. Molly was from another video. That's okay. Molly was from another. Now that he said the name, Molly was from another video. We've reacted to a Molly video before. Molly was on the other side of the screen the other time. Molly is an adult film star, if I'm recalling Molly correctly. That Molly was the one where they were talking about how Molly was, ruined, and they were being very racist as to why she was, quote, ruined, and they were very deplorable when it came to poor Molly, because, oh my god, they were horrible with that. So, okay, I now remember who Molly was, and they were just completely abhorrent with their descriptions as to what Molly has done in her porn acting career. Now that they said her name was Molly, I'm like, oh, that's who that is.
You give off and that you want to put out into the world.
She said put out.
So if being a woman or a female is a mindset, can your age also be a mindset? Can you choose to be, can you just say I feel 14, which is a classifiable mental condition, by the way,
So
there is a mental issue where gender dysphoria is a DSM condition. You don't have to have gender dysphoria to be trans, but there is gender dysphoria as a mental condition. But again, this is just a level of disingenuousness that age is something that happens over time. But scientifically speaking, if you and I were to relativistically speaking, if we were born in the same day and then I went into space and traveled like at relativistic speeds really quickly and then came back, I would, by the calendar, I would be the same age as you by the calendar, but as my clock ticked slower than yours because I was traveling relativistically to you, my clock ticked at a slower speed than yours did, I will have aged slower than you. So even though we have the same birth date, and even though technically I would be the same age as you, chronologically speaking, I would be younger than you because my body did not age as quickly as you because I moved at relativistic speed. So again, Mr. Kirk doesn't understand science. He has a second grade understanding of science where age is something that is, fixed, whatever. No, somebody can't just say, I can't just sit here today and say I'm 12. But scientifically speaking, there is a hypothetical situation where somebody born on the same day as me could go into space and move. There's actually been scientific experiments done where people have gone into orbit and they've looked at their watches and they've moved faster than the people who are down here, and they compared the watches of the people who are in space versus the people there, and the watches then show different times because the clocks move more slowly for them because they're moving faster in orbit, so they were moving more quickly than the people down here on Earth. So yes, time is a relativistic concept. It ticks differently for different people at different times. So again, Mr. Kirk doesn't understand science. Let's continue.
I will say, yes, I know people that act way younger than they act.
Yeah, Tamara Chance. Kaiser helmets are très chic. Yeah, and she'll just sit there and most of these things just do nothing. I've seen examples where she actually will say things, but she'll just sit there and do nothing. I'm surprised we don't have the blue-haired sex doll somewhere in the video. Maybe there was not enough room in this video for the blue-haired sex doll, which is I'm kind of disappointed about, but
actually are, and they love acting way younger than they actually are. And I know people that act way older than they are, and they and they pride themselves in that. And I think,
okay, fair enough. So if a 35-year-old man claims he's 14, should we have any problem if he wants to have sex with another 14-year-old?
no, I'm not saying that you should.
Probably should have a problem, I think.
No.
Well, no, because that 35-year-old has an issue of, if that 35-year-old has a mental where the person actually has the mindset of a 14-year-old, because that person hasn't developed past the mindset of a 14-year-old, that person still that person probably can't consent themselves to any sort of sexual activity. But no, that person should also not be able to legally have sex with anybody who's underage as well, because again, that would be illegal. Again, it's gross that these people want to make these comparisons. It's like they're almost wanting to justify sex with kids. They're going to argue, no, we're trying to do the opposite. But I'm sure there are people who are making this argument that that are going to try and justify it the other way around, because they can't have genuine conversations about this. They're always trying to make the absurd argument to try and distract from the point. And that's the problem here. That's why this is toxic masculinity, because they can't argue a point. Honestly, they can't argue a point just without going into these absurd amounts, without just being genuine. They refuse to be genuine because they have to come up with these absurd points.
I'm not saying that they should be able to have sex, but they can
who's to say he's not 14?
I feel 14.
Right.
They're able to state that.
Okay.
Grid One Motorsports donated to.
We're gonna skip
That's two different things.
Why?
Because you
It's
can't
a
go
mindset,
back
isn't
in
it?
time.
Your age isn't a mindset.
Yeah.
I mean,
but then why is your sex or your gender a mindset? And
because there are studies that show that people who are trans women have brain chemistries that more match cis women than they do cis men. There's more to biology, there's more to gender development than just your X and Y chromosomes. There's actually more than 6 known combinations of X and Y chromosomes. There's different levels of hormone levels that you can have. There's no set level of hormone levels that a guy can have and a girl can have, or somebody who's non-binary can have, or what have you. There's all sorts of different other things that can take place in human development that can affect you. Male and female are just a simple approximation based off of certain bodily functions. It doesn't necessarily, and even the Scientific American, which is a respected scientific journal, has several articles that tells you that the science of two sexes is antiquated and it is not what we know now as truth when it comes to sex and gender, when it comes to biology. And they just don't want to admit it because they're stuck at the second grade level of sex and gender and biology. Nick Rich, sex education is an issue for maggots. Is anyone surprised? No, we're not.
Age isn't.
I don't know which one is which. One of you could probably say, but sex and
do
gender
you agree?
is
At
different.
least acknowledge that sex and gender are two separate things.
So
that's what I was going to say.
there are 0 genders, 2 sexes, and infinite personalities.
What?
Okay.
Gender doesn't exist.
What do you mean?
Okay.
Sex
There's actually, what about intersex people, Mr. Kirk?
does. So the parts you're born with is who you are.
How does gender?
Oh, he just said parts. He now flipped. He just changed from chromosomes to parts. And as I said earlier, I know somebody who was born with XY chromosomes, but the parts that are typically attributed to a female person. So what is it? Is it chromosomes or is it parts? What is that person in? That person wasn't intersex. That person just happened to have developed in a certain way that made that person have XY chromosomes and female. That person now is considered legally a trans man because that person had to go through certain procedures to eliminate their breast tissue, to turn themselves to have pecs. I forgot what the name of the GoFundMe that he had was. But they now have full-on beard, facial hair. You would look at him, you would never think that this person was ever considered to be a woman on their birth certificate. This person is a man. He is a dude. He's a handsome dude at that. You know, I know plenty of dudes that are, or plenty of people that are thirsty for him. You know, whatever. But he's still a dude. But also, there's less. I think there are less problems with conservatives when it comes to trans men than there are with trans women, because they're much more threatened by trans women. Because, oh no, here's the evil man who's trying to dress up as a woman to hurt other women and kids, and they don't necessarily have the same views when it comes to trans men because, you know, they're ridiculous. But anyway. Chris, you lost them with the word science. You're probably right.
Gender not exist.
It's a 1960s clinical term, largely made out of the Academy of John
Clinical?
Money and Alfred Kinsey and many postmodern
Oh no, Kinsey.
child psychiatrists, many of whom, by the way, were not really great people, but we don't have to go into that. But gender is a new term of the last 50 or 60 years. So.
Yeah, but it's still exists.
Oh no, a new term. Conservatives being not liking new terms. That's why they don't like cis, because it's a new term. That's why they're conservatives. They conserve the old way of things. They don't like change. They don't like new things. Shocking, I know. Let's continue.
But personalities exist. We can agree with that. Proclivities or interests or likes exist.
But that's why the whole gender thing, the whole even sex thing it's like a splatter graph, or whatever the word I'm looking for, is like, you know, you have little dots, like there's what's a man and there's what's a woman, and like there's the little points on the thing, and then everyone kind of falls in these little points on the graph based on how they developed. And then some people might be flat in the middle, and those people might be non-binary, and then you have people all over the place, and maybe you have people like all the way over here on the, or here, where I don't know where I put men on where I put the man dot. Maybe I put the man dot here. Then some over here, maybe have the ultra, you know, high testosterone men, and maybe here you might have, you know, women with high testosterone, but not quite non-binary. But they might be women with higher testosterone levels. Maybe they're more athletic or whatever. Maybe here you have the higher estrogen level, feminine people. Maybe here you might have more effeminate men or whatever. But maybe up here you might have somebody who might be gender non-conforming or whatever. But falls all over the place, because what you're calling different personalities is a product of not just their brain chemistry, but their development as they developed in the womb, and how they developed as a person, because of the combination of the 6 different ways you can have chromosomal combinations of X and Y chromosomes, plus other chromosomes that can pop up and change how you have gender development and other development, and the hormonal aspects that can affect brain development and other things like that. But again, they don't want to think about that. They want to simplify it to X, Y, and parts. And when you're only going to simplify it down to X, Y, and parts, you're looking at it at a 2nd grade level and not a common sense, rational, real science level.
So by that definition, then if you're a woman or a man, is your energy. It is your personality.
Well, yeah, the goal, or what used to be the case, is the vast majority, 99.9% of all people, their biology and their reality, or how they viewed their reality, I should say, were in alignment. And now that's not.
I would argue that that's not the case. I would argue that there are many more people where their presented personality and their biology may have matched, but just because they're presenting a certain way, it doesn't mean that internally they felt a certain way, because we lived in a society, and in some cases still live in a society, where they are shamed if they would be shamed if they came out and said something different. Like, back in the 1870s, if you're in the circus and you're the bearded woman, you're seen as the freak. You're seen well, you don't want to be seen as the freak. You don't want to be seen as whatever. But in other cultures, like, it was embraced more thoroughly. Like in Native American cultures, you could be seen as two-spirit. And that wasn't seen as something that was negative. That wasn't seen as something that was horrible. It was just something that some people were. And in those cultures, it was accepted. So maybe people in Native American cultures could have been more open about how they really were, because they were two-spirit. Now, some people who are not Native American will claim to be two-spirit, and that's not okay, because two-spirit is functionally a Native American concept. So people who are not Native American who claim to be two-spirit are appropriating Native American culture, so don't do it. However, the concept still applies, otherwise. So if you're somebody who today would say, I'm non-binary, you might not say that 50 years ago. You might not have had the terminology to say it 50 years ago. You might not have understood how to approach it 50 years ago. You might just say, okay, well, I want to be more like this, but I can't be because society is going to judge me like this. Or you might say, well, I feel like I should be a man, but I can't be, because if I'm a woman if I was born a woman and people say that I'm a woman, but I really feel like I should be a man, if I come out and say that, I'm going to be shunned by my family, I'm going to be shunned by my peers, I'm going to be shunned by society, so therefore I'm just going to pretend to be somebody who I'm not. And at some point, I'll probably end up unaliving myself, because I can't deal with the reality of who I am, and because society is not willing to allow me to be and live my authentic self and live my authentic life. So the idea that Mr. Kirk is suggesting, that we used to be 99% that way, it's not because people were 99% that way, it's because society forced that on them. But again, he can't understand that, or he's choosing to not understand that.
So much the case. So people are, first of all, there's many elements to this. People are told that they can become something they can't, so they go on a very...
They absolutely can become something they can, because they already are. It's just that they can have surgeries. We've had somebody on my show, Evie Winters, several times at this point, 2 times at least, who was born and identified on her birth certificate as a man, but she's always been a woman, and she was able to come out and live her authentic life, and she is much happier now. She's openly talked about. If you go to eviewinters.com and you see, she openly talks about her life and how she's dealt with things that happen in her life. She fully anticipated moving from West Virginia to Maryland. She fully anticipated that she was moving to Maryland, that she did not expect to be alive much longer after she moved to Maryland. She was expecting to move to Maryland, and that was going to be the end of it. She did not expect to live much longer because she was not happy with her life. But she was eventually able to transition physically. Again, you don't have to transition to be somebody to be a trans woman, but she was able to go through the procedure. She was able to go through and get the psychological help she needed. She was able to get the physical procedures that she needed to get done. She was able to get everything she needed to get done, and now she is living her true, authentic self, and she is much happier for it. And people like this would force them back into the closet and shame them for it. And it's a shame, and they should be shamed for shaming people for being like that, because we would have lost a treasure if what happened to her would have happened. Thank you for the follow, even though your name isn't that great. Interesting. Let's continue.
Very, very damaging, self-destructive pattern of medical interventions that even if you're pro-trans, you have to acknowledge that, you know, hysterectomy at age 17 is not exactly an easy surgery.
And nobody is giving anybody who's 17 a hysterectomy like normally. Like, people who might get a hysterectomy at age 17 are people who might have like cancer at age 17 and therefore need a hysterectomy. The people who are having actual physical transition surgeries in every single clinic that I've looked at, every single clinic that I've looked at, and I've done the research on this, require you to be over 18 and having gone through hormonal therapy for at least a year. So that means you have to be at least 19, because they won't put you on hormonal therapy for the most part until you're 18, unless there is a wild exception. Unless you've talked through with your doctors and your psychologists and your parents, and there's general agreement that you need the hormonal therapy prior to being 18. Usually, and I'm not just talking puberty blockers, I'm talking full-on hormonal therapy. And in most cases, they're not going to give you the hormonal therapy until you turn 18. So once you turn 18, you're going to start your hormonal therapy, and then once you're on hormonal therapy for at least a year, at that point, you'll be qualified to be able to get surgical transition being done. So I don't know where he's getting his information that 17-year-olds are getting full-on hysterectomies by choice. If there's any that happens, it's few and far between, and it's probably an exceptional condition based on either an extreme case or probably for some other reason that he's not being honest about.
I think anyone at 17 should be altering their body. But
no, I agree.
Yeah.
It's happening right now at
No, it's not happening at any sort of rate that you're going to suggest it is happening at.
Thousands of young kids across the country are getting what is called gender-affirming care, but
gender-affirming care is not just biological or actual physical changes. Gender-affirming care could just be psychological help. Gender-affirming care could be allowing somebody to wear a binder if they are a trans man and want to not have their breasts be on display for everybody. Gender-affirming care could be allowing somebody to wear clothes that they make them feel more affirmed to the gender that they are instead of the gender that was assigned to them on or assumed of them on their birth certificate. Gender-affirming care does not mean you're getting surgery at 17. Like, this is what they do. They lie about what's going on in order to make you afraid of trans folk and the activists who are trying to care for trans folk, to try and pass draconian laws that make it more likely for trans folk to commit suicide because people are rejecting them for who they really are.
It's irreversible
care or
damage.
Surgeries?
Both. So
See, and she's at care or surgeries because she's making it a point to let him know that care doesn't mean surgeries. And he's claiming that surgeries. I guarantee you that the thousands of people getting care are not surgeries. If there are surgeries, they're going. Like, there's a clinic that, like, there's the Duke Clinic that got a lot of attention on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. And that gender clinic does do surgeries for kids that are like as infants, but they're not doing trans surgeries on infants. But if like an infant or a toddler or a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old has some sort of thing where their genitalia is damaged, you bring that person to that so they can fix their existing genitalia so it can be returned as close as possible to where it is. That doesn't mean they're doing trans surgery on 5-year-olds. It means they'll do other surgeries and treat other conditions on top of trans procedures. But again, they don't want to talk about that. They don't want to deal with that because then they'd have to be honest about the situation that they're debating.
Puberty blockers and hormone
There's
blockers.
thousands of kids that are getting
Puberty blockers is not surgery.
hysterectomies across the United States.
No, thousands of kids are getting puberty blockers or hormone block.
Okay, so now he's had to crawfish, as we say down here in Louisiana. He's now backtracking to what he said. Thousands of people are getting surgery, so now it's backtracking to thousands of people are getting puberty blockers, which is a completely different thing. Puberty blockers can be a reasonable thing for people to take if it's determined by their doctors, by their parents, and by the child that that's the thing that needs to be done. And it should be the conservative viewpoint that it should be up to the parents and the doctors and the child themselves to all have that discussion. And the conservative viewpoint should be that government should not be involved in that decision. But somehow magically, conservatives are hypocritical on that, but hypocrisy is a conservative prerequisite.
So hormone blockers or puberty blockers, probably even more, tens of thousands.
You could stop using those, though.
And as far as breast reduction surgery or hysterectomies, we don't know the number, but I'll even say it's probably...
We don't know the number because he's trying to assert something. He doesn't know the number. There may be some breast reduction surgery. I know a friend of mine. I know somebody. We met in college. We're still friends. She had breast reduction surgery at, I think, 16 or 17. Why? Was it because she was a trans man? No. It was because her breasts were too large for her body and it was giving her back problems. So they made the decision for her to have a breast reduction surgery. So she wouldn't have back problems. And she was much better for it. It happens.
Probably only a couple dozen. It's probably, you're right, it's probably not thousands.
Right.
Oh, so he admitted that she was right. So again, he's being
90
overly...
seconds.
And yeah, we have done 90 seconds on Blog Talk Radio. So if you're still listening on Blog Talk Radio, head on over to liberaldaneradio.com or to twitch.tv/liberaldaneradio and watch there because we're not ending at the end of the podcast time. The scheduled podcast time will be ending when this is done probably. And after I deal with some of the comments in the chat. So let's continue.
But we don't know the exact numbers, but an estimate is anywhere between 10 to 15,000 minors, and is growing, are currently receiving monthly doses of hormone replacement estrogenic therapy.
Yeah, but you can stop those and be like...
Well, that's the question, right?
Are they getting hormone replacement therapy or are they getting puberty blockers? Because you've already confused the issue of whether or not thousands of people are getting affirming care, which is surgery, which you've said you started off with saying that gender affirming care was surgery. Now you're saying gender affirming care, surgery or gender affirming care. Now you're saying gender affirming care could be puberty blockers or hormones. Now you're confusing whether or not is it puberty blockers or is it hormone therapy? Which is it? The tactic of conservatives on this issue is to muddy the water so you can't have an honest debate. This is why people like Charlie Kirk are dangerous. This is why I do reaction videos to this sort of thing, because they want to muddy the water. If you want to have an honest discussion about this, I'm all for having an honest discussion about this. But this is not an honest discussion by Mr. Kirk, because Mr. Kirk wants to muddy the water so you can't have a real debate about this.
There's a lot of detransitioners that are speaking out that are not able to puberty is not an assembly line that you could just push a button and restart. That is a increasingly disproven scientific theory right now. Chloe Cole is one of the most famous detransitioners she's in her 20s and she was sold a bill of goods, and when she was 16 she said, I think I'm a man, and she went on a very, very aggressive regimen of hormone blockers and puberty blockers, and she has huge regret, and hopefully one day she'll be able to have children again. But it gets back to a question of so I'm just making a...
And this is why when you have such situations, you do need to have, agreement with everybody involved, including the person, including the parents, including the doctors, including psychologists, and everybody has to come to an agreement that this is the best decision for the person, for the patient at this time. Is it possible that somebody at some point later down the line might say, I regret it? Maybe. Is it possible that this person was manipulated by some extremist conservative whack job into thinking that, and shamed this person into thinking that what they did as a kid was wrong, and that's why they regret it? Maybe. It's highly likely, in my opinion. I'm not saying it's actually happened, but it's highly likely that a lot of these people who are so-called detransitioners are people who have gotten latched onto by these rabid right-wing evangelical conservative types who are using them to convince them and guilted them into thinking that they did something wrong, and are now using them in their attempts to shame other people. I wonder how many of these people who are detransitioners became upset about the fact that they were transitioned organically by themselves with nobody else having any say or any influence on that decision. My guess would be that it would probably be a small number. But again, I could be wrong. This is just my opinion.
Point though that these ideas have consequences. It's more than just a silly question. Oh, what is a woman? That if you can't answer it, or at the very least say that you should allow minors to become adults before they.
And remember, this all started off with what is feminism. This all started off as a discussion as what is feminism, and whether or not Mr. Kirk agrees with feminism or not, and it became all about trans things, because the trans conversation, because he couldn't have a conversation about feminism, so we needed to pivot the conversation into an anti-trans conversation. And again, and he started the conversation about, quote, what is the woman, disingenuously, because their definition of what is feminism did not include the word woman. Their definition of feminism, again, said all genders being equal. So his question, again, of what is a woman is a disingenuous question meant to distract, because they did not give the definition of feminism that he wanted to enable him to attack their definition. So he had to erect a straw man argument of feminism to attack that, and then pivot into other topics so that they could, not have a real legitimate discussion on the issue. Let's continue.
They make these decisions, then, and this is not a small thing, the quote-unquote gender-affirming care. We know that in California you have to be 18 years old to get a tattoo, and yet 14-year-olds can go to what we call a doctor and get highly aggressive hormone replacement therapy treatment, sometimes without even notifying their parent. And all of these are ramifications of the inability to answer very.
And I guarantee you that the only people who are doing that without notifying the parents are the people who probably have abusive parents, who they're afraid that, they maybe came out to their parents and the parents beat them or something. These are, again, the exceptions. They're going to latch onto these exceptions as to why it's terrible, but not understand that the people that are getting these done are also exceptions.
Very simple biological questions.
I would be interested in seeing your exact study or citation for when it comes to puberty blockers, because I know a lot of people, or not a lot of people, there's a lot of people who end up on puberty blockers not because they're necessarily trans, but because they're going through puberty too early, and there are clear negative side effects and consequences of, let's say, a 10-year-old girl getting her period.
That's a separate. You're right.
That's a separate issue. I don't want to talk about that issue because it harms my argument.
Used on cis children. I think what you're talking about is precocious puberty.
But it's not used on perfectly healthy, physically able-bodied children, right? So there's a great book that I guess we have to
let's pass through
outspoken people against what is called gender-affirming care, and she's treating hundreds of kids that are now damaged by this.
Detransitioners exist, but what do you say to the thousands of trans people that actually report happiness and being healthy after they receive gender-affirming care?
Don't doubt that in the short term, testosterone therapy from someone who has a fair amount of testosterone, it can make you feel confident. It can make you feel better in your skin. That is not a lasting effect, though.
But it is for some people.
Well, the suicide rate. I can't say that word. The self-harm rate after 8 to 10 years actually goes up. It nearly doubles. And
I question that. But the self-harm or the self-unaliving or whatever rate of kids that don't get treated, for every person who is a child who is trans, for every person that accepts that person for who that person is, the unaliving rate, the self-unaliving rate, drops by 50%. So I'm sure he's not going to pay any attention to that study, because that study is just as important to look at. But he's not going to pay attention to that study whatsoever. Three Girls, who is the woman in the background with the helmet? A regular on the show, and I haven't watched the Whatever podcast enough to really know exactly who she is, other than she's there regularly and she regularly wears the helmet, and often she doesn't say anything. Sometimes she does, often she doesn't, at least from the clips that I've seen. So that's the best I can tell you right about now. So anyway, let's continue.
We're still studying it. That's the other point, is that I'm not going to throw around a lot of studies here, and they very well might be right. It might.
I'm not going to throw around a lot of studies now, because if I did, that would help disprove my point. That's what he's saying.
Have helped them individually, but let me give you an example. If a medication is on the market and it harms 1 in 250,000 people, for example, Robitussin. You guys ever take Robitussin?
No.
No, it's a cough thing. It's, they found that one of their lots of Robitussin last week might have been contaminated, and they did a massive recall, right? And it was just a whisper of it, okay? The point that is in medicine, the first rule used to be first do no harm.
Okay. Finding out that something is contaminated is different than understanding that some medicine might have harm. Like, you can have a medicine that actually might have adverse side effects and have it still be acceptable to be sold. But there's a difference. He's confusing medicines and treatments with adverse side effects and medicines that are tainted. There's a huge difference there, and he's confusing the two. He's purposely, I think, confusing the two, because he's muddying the water. I wonder if I'm sure the one in the middle on the right side might very well make that point. I'm going to assume, but we'll see.
And
the fact still is, right?
No, they've changed
the Hippocratic Oath.
They've changed it. Yeah, they have.
Who's they?
The American Medical Association and a lot of the medical institutions. It's similar, but it's not the same.
By like woke ideology.
Well, you'd be surprised actually. The medical industry's been taken over by a lot of radical forces.
All doctors are woke now.
Well, for example, I mean, when they were giving monoclonal antibodies in the city of New York, they were prioritizing people based on the color of their skin. Black individuals in New York got monoclonal antibodies above their white counterparts.
Was it based on the color of their skin, or like maybe their background related to like their socioeconomic status? It
was racial, but I don't want to get too deep into that.
I don't want to get too deep, because if I actually looked at the numbers, it'd probably be that the person sitting across from me was correct, and that I'm just making up numbers out of my ass. But maybe we'll look into that at the end of this video. Remind me in the chat. Monoclonal antibodies, New York City.
But the point that I'm just trying to make is that in medicine in particular, you must have a cautious approach, even if there were pluses and positives, which might very well be true. If there's even a 1%, a 2% adverse event, you pull the drug immediately, because you...
No, again, if there's adverse events because of like tainted supplies, yes, you pull the drug. If there's adverse effects because that are known, that are accepted, you still don't pull the supply. You just understand that there might be adverse effects, and you deal with the risks as they come, and you understand that, okay, well, maybe certain people can't take the medicine or take the shot or can't take whatever because certain people can't take those shots or can't take that medicine for certain reasons. It doesn't mean you pull it, because known adverse reactions and then tainted medicine is two different things, but he doesn't get that.
First, do no harm. If there's something that is actively damaging a society, and it's now a certifiable fact that we see thousands of young kids are being told that they can transition, when in reality they have other underlying issues that we should address. Depression, trauma, anxiety, or they're on the...
The reason they might have depression, trauma, and anxiety is because they are not being treated as the person that they are. That's the thing. They might have those issues. Like a friend of mine was dealing with those issues because of an untreated, because she was not allowed to be the person who she wanted to be because of where she lived. Once she was able to live her true authentic self, many of those issues went away. We also have horrible, mental health in this country, which they don't want to do anything about either, because once you improve mental health care in this country, that's socialism. And if you start trying to push for better access to health care, and especially mental health care in this country, it's socialism. And then, these type of folks, these alpha red pill wannabe types, you don't want to, admit that you're weak and go to therapy, right? Because that's a horrible thing too, right?
The autism spectrum disorder, and they get mislabeled on whether a TikTok video or some sort of other thing makes them feel as if they might have, a transgender issue when they very well might have other issues that need to be addressed. 1 in 27 men are young boys are autistic. Anyway, sorry, I don't mean to
totally fine. I just had a quick question for you two, since you guys had pretty strong positions on this. Can men get pregnant?
Yes. Men can get pregnant because trans men can get pregnant, and trans men are men, and we're just skipping this commercial right now. But yes, trans men can get pregnant, and trans men are men, so men absolutely can get pregnant. Yes.
Oh,
Grid
okay.
One Motorsports donated $200. If we want to talk numbers,
$200. That's crazy.
These individuals, they might end up being lesbian or gay, but not transgender. And that's a completely different thing that doesn't require hormones.
And that's another thing. They'd want to confuse sexual orientation with gender or their sex. They confuse it. You can be a trans woman and still be a lesbian. You could like women and still be a trans woman. You don't have to stop liking women. If you're a trans, you can feel like you're a woman and identify as a woman and still continue liking women. They don't understand that fact either. It's too complex for the, as Donald Trump said, the poorly educated that he loved after the Nevada 2016 primary. They can't understand or grasp that concept.
Or eventually antidepressants on top of it. I'm sorry, Pixie, you were going to say something. So.
Yeah, my question was, can men get pregnant?
Yes.
Two things. I would say if you're a biological male, if we're going to define male through biology or whatever,
trans men can get pregnant.
Then no. I do want to push back on some things that I heard earlier.
Well, before you do that, go ahead. Aaron, do you have a answer to the...
I would say yes, because anybody who has a uterus has the capacity to give birth. So, for example, a trans guy who gets pregnant, yes, would be a man who is pregnant. But if you're talking about a man who is assigned a man at birth and does not have a uterus, then no, he doesn't have the ability to get pregnant. You look at me like I'm crazy or what? Do you disagree?
But a lot of women...
So do you want to know why young men are going away from the left? That's why young men are leaving the left.
No, but there are plenty of young men who understand that this is the case. That now, I'm sure the people who listen or watch the whatever podcast and who are fans of Charlie Kirk are saying, I left the left because of all this stuff. But there are plenty of people who pay no attention to these fools. There are a lot of people who don't like Charlie Kirk, who are not going to be part of the Charlie Kirk polls or whatever polling data that he gets, who are going to be like, I agree with the idea that trans men are men, and as such, trans men, and as such, men can get pregnant because trans men are men. Simple as that.
Why? They want to get
Why?
Because what you just said is...
Because they're uncomfortable acknowledging reality. Some trans men can get pregnant.
What you just said is at war with reality, and
it's not at war with reality. It's a true statement, because you are... you said gender is... He said earlier that gender is a construct, so therefore, if gender is a construct, then not real, then what's the difference?
I mean, a lot of women can't get pregnant either.
Vocabulary.
So that doesn't
yeah,
define-
exactly.
Right, a lot of women
This is
can't
the
get
question,
pregnant either. The ability to get pregnant does not make one a woman, because there are plenty of women that can't get pregnant.
I'll let you come in just a sec, Pixie. Which one of you referenced chromosomes? Is that well? You said like
Kirk mentioned chromosomes at first before he mentioned parts.
Oh, you didn't check our chromosomes, right?
Yeah.
Well, people understood what a woman was before chromosomes were discovered. So the definition does not require this type of abstraction.
But Kirk brought up chromosomes too. Why didn't you bring it up to Charlie Kirk? You only brought up chromosomes when she brought it up. You didn't bring it up when Charlie Kirk brought up chromosomes. Hypocrite. This week's hypocrite of the week is Brian from the Whatever Podcast.
Understood what a woman was on the basis of the societal norms at the time, generally speaking, right?
Well, it's more precisely, it's about like the gonads. If you were at any point in your life going to produce large gametes, then you're a woman.
And what if you're an intersex person? What then? A lot of times intersex people had their choice made for them, which, not fair.
Society, at least most societies as well, outside of like Western as well, but even Western, we can make this argument.
Okay.
What they would look at is the way that a person is like necessarily performing. So what is their role? That's why you have like the idea of like non-binary, third gender, et cetera, because there have been people also who have not performed their role as like a male or female. So they're put into the third category, third sex, whatever.
Okay.
So I would argue that for the vast majority of human histories and societies, what they look at is what is your performance? And that maps on to what we do now, because we don't really look at biology, we look at people act. That's why, let me finish.
Go ahead.
That's why we also, the terms less manly, he's less of a man than him, or she's not that womanly, makes sense. If gender was truly a binary, those words would make no sense. It would be like cat and not cat. That doesn't, you can't have a in between really. And the same thing applies for gender. There is a spectrum there. That's why the words less womanly, more manly, less manly make sense to us.
And all of those things are fluid.
That is a very, very, very interesting point. That's almost a mic drop thing. If these people will use the term less manly and more manly, more womanly, less womanly, but yet insist that gender is a binary. Wow. That's just... Let's clip that on Twitch, because holy crap, that's just mic drop. I don't agree with the idea of something being more manly or less manly, but for the people who would use those terms, they're going to say that things are less manly or more manly, yet they're going to insist that gender is a binary. That is a major, amazing point. She just owned them.
Throughout time, like what constituted like masculine tendencies or behaviors will be different now than it was several years ago, or even like things like colors. Like for example, pink used to be considered a masculine color. Pink is no longer really considered a masculine color; it's considered a feminine color. So there was never anything inherently masculine about the color blue or the color pink or anything like that. That could always change at any given point in time.
Do you think that male brains and female brains, or men and women brains, are different, wired differently?
There are differences.
Yes, and trans women have brains that are more similarly wired to cis women than they are to trans women have brains that are more similarly wired to cis women than they are to cis men. Because trans women are women. You just lost another point there, Mr. Kirk.
Between male and female brains, but I believe it's a matter of like statistical averages of like gray matter. There's not going to be like distinct anatomical features that differentiate a female brain from a male brain.
Really? You really think that?
Well, no, it's proven like scientifically.
Well,
like
no,
when we
it's
take
not.
yes, it
No.
is. When we take a brain scan of a male and female, the average doctor can't look and be like, that is a male brain right there.
Not true.
Now,
No, hold on.
Wait,
if
let me
you do a
finish my
SPECT
sentence, please.
scan,
And they're actually the women there are actually wrong. As far as I'm aware, you actually can notice a difference. There are differences in brain scans because the trans women brain is closer to the cis woman brain than it is to the cis male brain.
okay.
Jeff, what is cis? Cis is a scientific term that's the opposite of trans. That's all it means.
If you do a SPECT scan, you can see what parts of the brain light up, and in a woman, the basal ganglia and the amygdala is far more active, which is the inner thought.
And alligators are ornery because of an enlarged medulla oblongata.
matrix. Women have a far busier inner thought life than men do. Would you guys agree with that?
I agree.
Right,
I was
but-
gonna say it's very.
So that's not true.
It's very
Wait,
well known that like men generally are more on the logical side of things, and women are more on the emotional side of things. And I think that has a big role, or the way that our brains are wired has a big role to play. I'm not saying that if you took babies who were completely unmolded, that their brains would look different, but I think as we age, living in the gender that we are given, our brains become attuned to certain things, and that's why parts of our
Yeah,
brain
like
light up.
piggybacking off of that point, I don't doubt that the studies that you looked at did find differences in like brain mapping scans between men and women, but the key thing is that they looked at men and women. So that's already a brain that's been subjected to a lifetime, or not a lifetime, but like decades long
So do you-
socialization.
let-
So
I
that
just wanna
socialization is
make
going
sure-
to impact it. If you looked
Sorry, I
at
don't mean to
like a
interrupt,
brain
yeah.
scan of like infants, for example, like a male infant and a female infant, it would be like how different would it really
So-
look? Do you think it would look significantly different?
No, it's not even close. Of course, it's different, and I can prove it to you in two ways. But the first one, do you guys know the John
'Cause I'm
Money
a doctor.
gender
Yeah.
experiment?
No.
So okay, I'll just really quick. John Money, who is a total creep, he believed that this is before we mapped the human genome. Okay, this is before we even knew about chromosomes. He said that men and women are blank slates at birth, and he said that they're formed through the toys we give them, the colors we appropriate to them, and they're blank slates. There was these identical twins. One of the twins burns themselves terribly in the genitals, and he said raise that twin as a girl. And basically his entire life he was tortured, and awful story. Eventually rebelled against John Money, and this twin eventually was told that, hey, you were born a boy but raised as a girl, and even had a vagina put onto you
Yes, that's a horrible person.
artificially. And he was like, instead of being mad, he was relieved, because he said, I knew I was a boy all along. So there's no clinical evidence to support that.
So, which just goes to show you can't force somebody to be something that they're not, which also applies to trans people. You can't force them to be something that they're not. So if somebody says that they're a trans woman because they're a woman, but even though they were born a man, they're telling you that they're a woman, so you believe them. You're not making the point that you think that you're making there, Mr. Charlie Kirk, sir.
That secondly, though, it's a funnier one, okay? Do you hear me out? And I think this will resonate
I'm sure it's a funny one.
with all of you. Harvard University locked a group of men in a room alone, 100 of them, and a group of women in a room alone, okay? And they said, what did you think about for 30 minutes? The men, no surprise, sex and sports. The young ladies, what did they think of for 30 minutes? They replayed conversations that they had in the last couple of days.
Real.
For the record, a man has never replayed conversations that they've had.
Do that?
That is totally not true. I have replayed conversations in my head many, 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 many times. Don't project your toxic masculinity on me, sir. I have done that many, many, many times. And I am not a trans woman. I'm a dude, and I have absolutely replayed conversations in my head many, many times. So, shut up.
I
Our
do that all
brains
the time.
are
Daily news. Is this what your show has come to? I often do reaction videos to the whatever and the Fresh and Fit podcasts towards the end of the show as a Unravelling Toxic Masculinity segment on my podcasts, and make it into videos to upload. Where have you been?
brains are
True.
different, everybody.
Do you really not do that?
I feel like I overthink
No, of
everything.
course not.
You don't
Hold
think
on.
about
Of course not. I don't think about things. I just think about sex and sports because I'm an alpha male and that's what I do. No, you because you don't have self-reflection. That's the problem. You probably because you're a conservative and you lack empathy.
I'm making
conversations that
You've
you
never
have.
had like a shower argument or like shower thoughts or anything like that?
no, and that's not society, my friend. That is biology.
Nope, you are so wrong. I'm to guarantee you that I will probably have many people who are guys who will agree with me that they've replayed conversations that they've had in their head, that they've absolutely have done that before. Just because you haven't done it, it doesn't mean that it is. You probably have done it. I would guarantee you that Charlie Kirk has done this and won't admit it because he thinks it's a feminine trait and he thinks he'll be attacked if he admits that he ever did it. Benny Loco, if men were logical, they wouldn't let their penis dictate their life. One for Benny.
You are wired to have those rethought. We aren't. It's not
You're wrong, because again, I have those thoughts.
a learned behavior. It's not about dolls. It's not about dresses. Our biology, our brains are.
It's probably about empathy and caring about what other people think about, generally speaking. Like, if you have empathy for other people, you probably are more likely to think about what other people think about you. And you're probably more likely to replay those things in your head and replay how might I have had that conversation differently.
Are made differently.
If you don't care about how your interactions with other people, yeah, you're not going to replay conversations in your head. If you care about your interactions with other people, yes, you're going to, if you care about that, yes, you might replay the conversation in your head. You might think, how might I have said that thing differently? I had a conversation with somebody who's part of this podcast, and I replayed the conversation in my head, and I was like, yes, I could have done that much differently, and then I apologize for the person for not having the conversation as I should have, because you can self-reflect.
You've
I don't
really
think
never thought
anyone's
about a
disputing that we
conversation
have
after?
like
We
different.
don't
Yeah, no,
replay
I
any
agree with that.
conversations.
Ever.
You're wrong.
Men
I agree
don't.
with
Never
that,
like
but
done that.
the thing
Am
where
Am I trans? Because
people-
sometimes sometimes I will.
You gotta go on
Very
hormone
rarely
blockers.
though.
Yeah.
Very rarely. Sometimes occasionally.
Men
I'll
are very
replay the
forward
Thank
thinking.
you,
What
Brian,
is
from the
next?
Whatever
The
podcast
job,
for
the
proving
interview
my
tomorrow.
point for
and I'm
me.
saying women aren't.
Jesus.
Women are very reflective. That's why females are better at poetry.
Again, again, this goes to my whole splatter, whatever you want to call it, thing, where gender, you have the man spot and the woman spot, and where people fall is not exactly on those spots. It's all over the place. So if this is the man, if this is the man spot or whatever, and so the more testosterone, maybe Charlie Kirk is somewhere over here. Maybe he's pretending he's over here. I don't know. But maybe Brian is more closer to here, and maybe he's more likely to be and maybe I'm a little on this side of the dot. Maybe I'm more self-reflective, or whatever. I don't know. But that's the thing, because there's no just two gender thing. It's an infinite amount of combinations of chromosomes, of the 6 possible plus chromosome combinations of the sex chromosomes. There's the other possible variations that you might have on your chromosomal structures, plus there's the different hormone levels that might affect how you develop, etc. So that's all going to depend where you're going to show up on that graph, which is going to affect how you think about things and how you go about your daily life. So when somebody like Charlie Kirk says he never thinks about previous conversations before, that shows me that he has zero empathy, probably, as well. When Brian from the Whatever podcast says that he might do it sometimes, maybe Brian from the Whatever podcast has a little more empathy than Charlie Kirk, but maybe not as much as some other people. Let's continue.
Women are better at the more relational type aspects of being a nurse or an elementary school teacher. Again, that's not learned behavior. There is a
There are plenty of good nurses who are dudes. There are plenty of bad nurses that are women. I mean, like, does that mean that maybe that means that, but there's also the fact that we probably shoved women into nursing fields because there were women who were interested in medicine, but we told women, well, you can't be doctors, so nursing is where you go. But that's a whole nother conversation. If we actually left this at feminism, where this whole thing started at, maybe we could have been there. But no, now he had to pivot it to brain chemistry because he couldn't handle the conversation on feminism.
logical element to it, and it starts with, we don't even understand the brain as much as we can. We understand like
you don't
1% of 1% of it. But I think that study and your reaction affirms it, because if I had a group of men around you, like, what do you think of when you're alone? Like, I just think of the NFC Championship game, the stock market, and all the women I've been with.
I still think about a thing that I miscopied and pasted into a chat from like 20 years ago that embarrassed the hell out of me. Like there are things that I think about that all the time that have nothing to do with, I mean, yeah, sometimes I think about sports. Yeah, sometimes I think about gaming. Sometimes I think about all this other stuff. Sometimes I remember there were times in high school where I'd sit down and plot out, like, how I would play this certain game and the lists that I would build out for this certain game that I would play. And because, I'm a nerd. But like, there was also times I would reflect on, well, I remember having a thought. I would sat there one night thinking about, what will I say if this person asks me this question? Like, if there's a girl that I'm interested in, she might ask me this question. What am I going to say if she asks me this question? Like, I don't think Charlie Kirk has ever had that thought in his life. Turns out she asked me the question and I answered it perfectly. But that's a whole nother, but again, because I worry about things like that, and he doesn't, because I have empathy and I think about other people and care about other people, and he only cares about himself, in my opinion.
or the women I want to be with. It's a little different.
Do you think if they had conducted the study in a different country that the men and women would have given the same answers?
Yes, I think that these things are universal. And I mean, I can't say to that, that would be my speculation, that the men in Iran are thinking about soccer and Persian women, and the women are thinking about, you know, what's going on in their local neighborhood. These things transcend continent, they transcend culture, and we know that because one of the arguments that you were making is that, well, you know, at the fundamental root, these are learned and acted, you know, these are put on by Western society, but you go into African villages, like very poor third world African villages, they don't even have a term for transgender. The idea that a man can become
but you went into like Native American villages way back in the day, they had a term for two-spirit. They knew how to deal with individuals who were two-spirit because they understood it. They understood the concept. And I might argue that perhaps you might be able to go into villages like that if maybe they do have a term and he's just lying, or he's just uninformed, and maybe they do understand the concept, or maybe they do have a concept for such a thing for folks who don't fit on the binary spectrum or what have you, or maybe they don't. Maybe they have old standard, but just because you don't have a thing to deal with just because you don't have a way to deal with a particular concept, it doesn't mean the concept is invalid. And that's what conservatives just don't seem to be able to get. We didn't have a way to deal with the concept of, you know, somebody who was non-binary in the 1850s. That doesn't mean that such people didn't exist in the 1850s. It just, we didn't have the understanding of how those people might exist, that we should be treating those people in a way that is, you know, in a more humane way. We were just like, men, women, done. And that's it. And we wouldn't hear of anything else. I mean, some people, Chris, hermaphrodites or intersex folks, so some people may have dealt with, you know, those types of people in that type of development, but still, people who might still show as being, you know, of part-wise of one particular gender or another, but who might feel as if they were a different one, you know, those people were shoved into closets. Those people were not, we didn't have ways to handle it other than shoving those people into closets or treating those people as freaks. And that's what Mr. Kirk would continue to do. He would continue to treat people as freaks instead of treating them with compassion and empathy. Because again, no empathy. Let's continue.
A woman or a woman can become man. This is a uniquely Western phenomenon that is born out of the...
Because as they'll often say, this is the thing, conservatives will often say that Western culture is superior in many different ways. Maybe that's one example where Western culture is superior, that we've understood these things. We've grasped these concepts of that there are differences. They don't want to they don't want to take the things they don't understand with Western culture. There are certain things that are good about Western culture. There are certain things that are bad with Western culture, but Western culture has understood the concepts of, hey, we get science. We have more sophisticated science now and understand that development is not just simple boy, girl. We're more complicated than that. But they don't want to accept that we're more complicated than that because they can't handle it.
Academy, born out of college, that I will say, and I think we could agree, is largely they prey on people that have other underlying issues, and then it gets built on top of that. Autism spectrum disorder, depression, anxiety, some other sort of...
I think there might be intersections between people, but they also don't understand autism, because these are the same type of people that say vaccines cause autism, and they don't understand causation and correlation. Because, you know, oh, we have more people with autism now. No, we have included more conditions as being part of the autism spectrum, and we have become better at detecting as to whether or not people are part or under the umbrella of the autism spectrum, and as such, we are now able to label more people as being part of the autism spectrum. That doesn't have anything to do with whether or not somebody is trans or not. So yes, you may have people who are trans who are also under the umbrella, who might have a diagnosis that puts them underneath the umbrella of the autism spectrum, that doesn't mean we're confusing or conflating the two. You're just trying to muddy the water again.
Bipolar, schizophrenia, trauma, things of that nature.
There's a couple of things to push back here. Brian.
If you can, quick.
I don't mean to monopolize it.
Daily News. One of my conservative listeners, Charlie Kirk, is in over his head. He's clueless. He needs to stay in his lane. Thank you.
Sorry, Pixie.
No, it's okay. There's a couple of things.
I'm still impressed with the fact that the Whatever podcast has this dual camera thing going now, because I don't remember ever seeing that before. So kudos to them at least for doing this dual camera thing. It's an improvement on the way of them doing things. So kudos on that. And, shout out to the 80s cups too.
Want to push back on that because there are communities and cultures that we could search up right now in China, India, various Native American histories that have recognized the idea of third gender or outside.
Thank you for bringing up Native Americans, as I've already talked about, but yes, good. I'm glad that somebody in that room brought up Native Americans for Two-Spirit. I'm sure there are other cultures as well. Native Americans was the one that I am mostly familiar with. I'm sure there are other cultures as well that do understand concepts beyond the standard male-female binary, but yeah.
Gender that doesn't fit into this binary, so I wouldn't say it's just Western.
That is
and then
true.
on top
Wait,
of that,
let him answer.
No, but no, you please continue. You are right. I can address that at length. I don't think it's fruitful.
Okay,
Keep going.
Go ahead.
okay.
I can explain that at length. I don't think it's fruitful. He doesn't think it's fruitful because it ruins his argument. It just blows apart his argument. Because she's already blown apart his argument before with the comment about more manly, less manly, more feminine, less feminine. She's already blown apart the argument there about the gender binary. You can't believe in a gender binary and then say things are more manly or less manly. She's blowing it again. She's blowing apart the argument again, I should say, with the bringing up of the other cultures who do understand that there are things beyond the traditional binary, gender binary, like Native Americans with Two-Spirit. He doesn't want to accept it or acknowledge it or bring it up. He doesn't think it'll be fruitful because if he accepts it and brings it up, it then blows his argument to shreds, and he doesn't want to have his argument blown to shreds because then he's made to look like a fool, which is part of the course.
You're not wrong.
And then on top of that, you gave a case study. I kind of want to give a case study back. NPR did an article on this. I can't remember the name. But basically, it was about a person who felt gender fluid. And when they felt like they were a man and they did things like facial recognition or other tests regarding that, they would score like a man does, higher than most women. But when they got into the mindset of being a woman, they would score higher in woman-related tasks. So yeah, it does come back. You're saying this is all predisposed biology, but there might be something to be said about oh no, if you're thinking like a man, the mindset of a man, maybe that's more in tune with certain ways of thinking versus thinking like a woman. That doesn't mean it's all 100% biological basis. It means that hey, if you're raised to think in a certain pattern, you're going to perform in that pattern.
I agree. I mean, if a society can mold you, of course, but you're dealing with very powerful raw material that's underestimated in the current.
Okay, you're dealing with powerful that's very underestimated, i.e. the human brain. And he even himself said earlier that we don't understand the majority of the human brain. So maybe, just maybe, Charlie Kirk, if we don't understand the majority of the human brain, maybe we don't understand the fact that it's very well possible that there are people who do believe and understand themselves to be different than the gender in which they were labeled on their birth certificate, and maybe it's absolutely valid. You just don't understand why that's the case. And as such, you can't accept it because you can't put your finger around it because we as a society don't understand, as you've said, fully how the human brain works. But you're completely rejecting out of hand that people can exist. And as I've said before on the podcast, people who are transgender are the minority. They are the exception. Most people are not trans. Most people match the gender that they were assigned at birth. Simple as that. Vast majority of people match the gender assigned at birth. It's that simple. Some people don't, and they are valid as well.
current cultural conversation, and you can only guide that raw material so much. So let me ask another hypothetical. I'll just tell you, if I sit down with men, what do they always talk about? They talk about macro concepts, big things, stock market, sports, things that are very, like, let's just say bigger than individual. Women, if you sit down, they'll talk a lot about conversations or relationships, their kids, very micro.
Like, sometimes I talk about some of column A, and sometimes I talk about column B. I'm in the mood to help you, dude. You ain't never had a friend like me. What I want. Sorry. Sometimes I just break in the song.
This, one of the reasons why men and women brains are different, and they continue to be different, is there's different skill sets. And I think we can all acknowledge that. Like, men are better at some things than women, and women are better at some things than men.
And again, this is a vast overgeneralization. Maybe the reason, again, that men and women are so-called better at things is because we as a society have pushed men and women into those directions. But there are women who excel in STEM. There are men who excel in fields that are not STEM. Why is that? Because once we stop pushing people into those traditional roles, we start realizing that, oh, maybe we were wrong about all that. Just saying.
I don't know why that is a wildly
the way that you frame it.
Because it's not wildly controversial. It's the fact that you're confusing as to why that happens. We've pushed women to we've pushed women into certain careers. We've pushed women away from certain careers. We've pushed men into certain careers. We've pushed men away from certain careers. Societally, if we didn't push people away from or towards certain careers, we'd probably see much different results. Or I would at least argue that if he was true, if it was absolutely correct that he was true, we wouldn't be able to know it because we're biasing the samples by doing that pushing. The only way we could absolutely know for a fact that this statement was true is if we didn't do any of that pushing. But we do. We do push women away from certain fields. We do push men towards certain fields. We do that. Because we do that, we can't know for certain that this statement is true or not because we're skewing the samples.
It's like, oh, women are awesome at like small talk and like sewing or whatever, and then men are just awesome at like the stock.
Marie, helmet lady is security. Absolutely. I mean, do you want to get poked by that thing on the top of her head? I mean, she bends over and rushes you, you gonna die.
Market and being CEOs.
Let me ask you a question. But hold on. Why is it? Let me ask you a question. Why is it that the International Chess Foundation doesn't want biological men who believe they are women to compete with women? They say that will not allow trans men into the female category. Why is that?
I can't speak to that, but I'm just, if you're going to talk about like
what was that question? I think I missed it.
Ask you a question. Why is it that the International Chess Foundation doesn't want biological men who believe they are women to compete with women? They say that will not allow trans men into the female category. Why is that?
I can't.
Maybe because they are holding on to antiquated views. I mean, there are women who perform very well at chess, probably because we've driven women away from these things. I mean, there was a whole movie about that, about a talented woman chess player that was on, I think, Netflix, wasn't it? Again. Or maybe it was a series. I don't know. But again, we are taking as fact things that have been skewed by societal biases that have pushed men to certain areas and women away from certain areas. We've not pushed women into wanting to like play chess. So if women are not wanting to play, you're not gonna get as many possible good chess players out of the women because we've driven women away from wanting to play chess. If since the inception of chess, we would have welcomed everybody into playing chess, you probably would see just as many chess grandmasters that are women as men. Why? Because we wouldn't have skewed the samples. Then I'll die on that hill.
speak to that, but I'm just, if you're going to talk about like representation being the thing that
and this is why I would posit that even if I got big enough to be on the radar of like the whatever podcast or on the Fresh and Fit podcast, they'd never have me on because I would just blow their arguments to shreds.
lets you know that, oh, men are obviously smarter. You can.
Thank you, Putin. Yes, The Queen's Gambit was the movie. Thank you for reminding me of the name. I even saw a clip from it the other day on some video. I think I was on YouTube. I happened to get some chess came across my feed for some reason. They decided to put chess. Now that I've said chess, I'm going to get more chess. So there you go. But yes, Queen's Gambit was the movie.
Could break this down to race.
I never said smarter. I never said smart. I said different.
Then different.
Women.
Okay, then we could say this.
My wife does things with my child that I can't even dream of doing. Such
This should be good.
as having an intuition, compassion, empathy. She can.
At least he's admitting that he doesn't have empathy. But like, just because you lack empathy, it doesn't mean that's something that men lack. We should be encouraging more men to have empathy. Like, I would like to think that I have empathy for my kids. Like, I'm fairly certain I do. Like, I'm fairly certain that me and my kid, that me and my wife have very similar levels of empathy for the kids. Like, it's absurd to suggest otherwise.
Operate on 30 minutes of sleep. I need 8 hours, or else I'm like a
Don't underestimate yourself, Charlie.
Hold
I
on
think
a
you
second.
can
No,
definitely
hold on. No, women have a different giftedness, I believe, given by God.
Yeah, he has none of it. Absolutely, he has no empathy. That doesn't. But he's projecting his failures on others.
That is completely different men. I never said smarter. In fact, a woman's intuition is far better than my intuition. I trust my.
Well, his wife's intuition may very well be better than his intuition. That doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's intuition is bad, but
my wife's gut when it comes to people, when it comes to relationships, and she leans on.
I will absolutely challenge him that his wife's ability to pick relationships correctly. His wife is probably very bad at picking relationships, and I will use him as the prime example. Let's continue.
Me for investments or politics, we are given different gifting. Now, with that being said, some women have a gifting in that direction. Those are the exception, though. There is a general rule, and the general rule is that women are far more gifted at people and caretaking and the intimate. I don't mean that demeaning or derogatory. I never use the word smarter or dumber. You might be inferred. Oh, thank you, Molly.
Yeah. No, I actually very much agree with what you're saying. Me personally, I mean, sexuality is a big part of my life.
Well, I mean, you are a sex worker, which is, again, no judgment. They judge you. They judged you harshly on the show. I don't understand why. I don't know if this show is. I'm assuming that because of the two window thing, that this is after her last appearance on the show. I am shook that she would come back on the show after the way that they treated her on the previous show. Because they were absolutely shaming her for her career. They were absolutely shaming her for her career choices, for her choices of partner in her career. I mean, horrible. Maybe she thinks it's good for her. She's going to be good for her OnlyFans or whatever. And that's fine if that's her decision. But I'm shocked she came back on. But yes, sex and sexuality is a very important thing in her career, because for those who might have hopped in late, she is an OnlyFans person. And there was another episode that we've reacted to where they were horrific to her when it came to and racist to her with her choice of sexual partner when it came to the video that she did.
And I think what you're saying actually really ties into a lot of sexuality, because it's the man's role to be, kind of like if you're talking the nuclear family, it's like the man's role to kind of be the governing force of the family, take care of everything on the outside, take care of,
I mean, that's traditional gender roles, but I mean, that's just because that's traditional doesn't mean that's a good thing.
The finances, the stocks, all of that, and to kind of be the rock for all.
But that's because as a society, we've driven people to be that way. If we didn't do that as a society, and we would perhaps see it as more equal footing for everybody. Just saying.
All of the little things that the woman has to go through during the day. Just all the little conversations,
And if we lived in a society where women would get equal pay for equal work, if we lived in a society where women had the same opportunities as men in all aspects of the field, and we didn't push women away from certain careers, we didn't push men away from certain careers, we didn't push women towards certain fields, we didn't push men towards certain fields, if we had everything being on equal playing ground, and if you had a situation where you had the woman in a heteronormative type relationship going and being the breadwinner and the man staying home with the child, you might have a situation where the man picks up those roles and adapts accordingly and is the intuitive and the caretaker, because the man at that point would have spent more time with the child and would understand what the child needs, because you have spent more time with the child understanding, subtle hints and subtle cues. Oh, the child is doing this, X, Y, and Z, therefore I understand this is what the child needs and this is what the child is saying, etc., etc., etc. So no, it's because we've perpetuated these archaic gender roles. We've perpetuated these archaic things as to what men can do, what women can do, what men can't do, women can't do. We've perpetuated things as to why we've maintained this thing as a society even into 2024. So
the things that she has to deal with that you're not there, and I think that
again, as I said, if the roles were reversed, if the man was there and the woman was at work, the man would be able to know how to deal with the things when the woman wasn't there, because that's just how it is.
It's a really beautiful thing, like yin and yang. Like there's
beautiful
parts of men that complement women, and there's parts of women that complement men. And the best thing is there's things that women can do that men cannot, and there's things that men can do that women cannot. And I think that the issue is we try and figure out like who's better, who's more powerful, who can.
I mean, I'll fully support her. Again, I fully support her career is what she's choosing to do. I'm disagreeing with her here, because she's not just because she's supporting what Mr. Kirk is saying, but because she's. I mean, if she wants to choose, like there are people like within, as I'm aware, like who choose to be trad wife, like they choose the trad wife role, even who are progressive types, who they but it's their choice. If it's your choice to be like a stay-at-home mom and have the person go work, have the husband go work, that's fine if you want to choose that, but it should be a choice. It should not be something that society forces onto people. But if it's the choice of a couple for that to have, like, if the woman is a successful businesswoman and the man's going to stay home and take care of the kids, that should also be a choice. And it should not be something that's shamed as society, should not be something that other people judge the man for doing either, because if that's the correct choice for the family, what the family is doing, by all means, that's what should be done. So,
who gets to say?
Chris, that's a nice fairy tale. I mean, I don't think it's a fairy tale. I just think it's the ideal, and I think we should always strive for the ideal, and that's what I try and do. And and in order to get that ideal, we have to break down the toxic ideals of society that perpetuate and stop those things from happening, which is why I do these Unraveling toxic masculinity videos, because at the end of the day, it's toxic masculinity that perpetuates things like the patriarchy, that perpetuates things like the man's roles to do this and the women's roles to do that, or what have you, or that women can only do certain things and men can do certain things, and even women can internalize that toxic masculinity and perpetuate it. It's internalized misogyny. And I think that she's doing that as well right now, that she's internalizing some of that misogyny and embracing it. And it's unfortunate that some people do that. But
what happens, and I think that the issue that's really dividing, and the beauty comes when you kind of bring those skills together.
I agree.
That's wonderfully said, Molly.
That was beautiful.
That was so beautiful, Molly. Thank you, Molly. But that's the end of that video. That's where that video ended. It's kind of a weird place for that video to end. But anyway, again, this is another one of the examples, one of the videos of unraveling toxic masculinity. And it did go kind of long, like full on an hour and a half. And I am going to just probably post that whole thing up to YouTube after the show. So it'll probably be live tomorrow. So what do you think? Agree, disagree with the video? Make sure to leave your comments below. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much and have a good day.